I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on this 70 Nova that's in the shop. You can see on the last video, if you haven't seen it yet, please go back and watch it, where we bring the car in the shop, we do a walk around on it, we put it on the jig, and we verify everything is straight, square, and level. So now that we have it level again and everything set up where the car's not going to move, it's got this sturdy base underneath, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start cutting this car apart. This is actually one of the few times I'm kind of excited that the owner seems like he wants to cut more off the car, ordered more parts than even I anticipated. He just wants his car right. He wants everything that has a potential rust or give him problems down the road off the car and replaced with new sheet metal that's kind of put in a little bit stronger. And actually, in the sense, that's going to save us some time knowing that, you know, we don't have to go and patch anything else on the car. So he said if there's any doubts on anything else, you know, let him know. We'll get the parts in stock. So the idea is we're going to get the skins off the car first. It's going to be very similar to other cut down videos, and we're going to work our way from the back forward. At one point we'll probably start on the front and start pulling the floor pan. We'll figure it out, but stay tuned. I'll show you how we go about cutting this car apart. We're going to pretty much get right into the work. Some of the tools just to show you that we're going to be using. I use a lot of these cut-off wheels with an electric grinder. I like the electric ones because they slow down a little bit. They don't eat the disc as much, and you don't have a wire hanging that you could accidentally cut. So the bad thing is they go through batteries pretty quick. The cutoff wheels, they do go pretty quick, but I like the cutoff wheel, I've said in the past, because you can control what levels you're cutting, where something like the plasma cutter, which we will use, that's going to go through multiple levels. You can't just take one part of the sheet metal off. Drill, spot welds, any panels that we're going to try to keep, we're going to try to drill and save those panels as best we can. Protection down here, and then the air hammer you can use this. I sharpen mine with a kind of a hard point that way, and then more flat. And what we're going to do with this, we can take panels, we can cut around spot welds. If you can bust through spot welds, it's going to probably leave a hole on the backside. It's not the end of the world, but the idea is to cut around panels, and with the air hammer, you can dig it in and use that as a cutoff blade. You can see it actually nicks the panel if you hit it hard enough. So that's something else that we can use to cut things with. And then the belt sander, some of the spot welds, especially on the frame rails and the thicker stuff, where the spot weld cutter, the ones I'm using today, there's two different kinds. Actually, I'll show you this. So there's the ones with the hole saw on them. You know, you got to drill a 16-inch pilot hole. And then this one too, I drill a pilot hole usually, but then there's actually the spot weld cutter. So I got a couple versions of these, just a drill bit. Drill out the spot welds, and then usually when you come back through with the air hammer, it doesn't do as much damage. But what I was saying was, with the belt sander, the spot welds that if you're trying to save the panel underneath, you don't want holes through it, or certain frame rail panels, the real thick ones, a lot of those I would just belt sand the top of them, you know, cut them right around, and then that will save the bottom panel without having to do a metal repair. It takes a little bit longer, but that spot weld cutter can be a pain in the butt if you got really good solid spot welds. So let's get to cutting. Oh, and safety thing, wear gloves. You know, a lot of this is sharp metal. You're going to cut your hand, so try to wear gloves, long sleeves when you're doing all this stuff, and just be safe in the process. So let's get to cutting this car up. We're going to try to make this a fast-paced video. We're going to try to get doing some work, and by the end of this video, this car should look a whole lot less, you know, I guess rusted, but there'll be a whole lot less parts. So let's get to it.
If you've seen any of my other cut down videos, the process could be very similar. It doesn't really matter what car it is. Most of the time, I almost want to start in reverse order of assembly. So the roof is usually the last thing to go on these cars. So what we're going to do, we're going to expose the lead channels. I'm just kind of taking out any kind of filler above it to make sure there is lead in this car and someone hasn't messed with it, and then added some kind of Bondo filler or other filler in its place. So we did expose under the filler that there is lead in this car. We're going to remove that first. I don't want to cut around it. I just want to see my lead joints, and then when we start with a cutoff wheel, we'll go right to the top of the lead joint and right to the bottom of the lead joint. This is something noticing that there's a lot of ventilation in the area, I'm just taking a torch with a rosebud tip, just using heat to just melt out the lead. I'm taking the scraper in there and just working the rest of the lead right down and let it just fall on the floor. Once it cools on the floor, we'll scrape and just drop it up. You can make sure you put something on the floor to not damage the concrete or anything else. Usually it's all right, but sometimes it can clump up. Once the lead's out of the car, we're going to go ahead and we could go around the perimeter, and I'm using the cutoff wheel. Like I said, we're going to just cut the perimeter of this roof. Be careful while cutting this roof structure. The idea is not to go in too deep. We don't know what's under this roof. We're trying to save most of this roof. There's drip rails under here and everything, so do not cut them off. As of right now, in the time of this video, we haven't been able to find any drip rails for these year's Nova. So if someone has a link to that or knows where we can find them, this car needs some drip rail repair. We did find, but right now we have to save what's there because we're not able to find them. So saying that, you can see I'm cutting above the drip rails right at the edge, not going through them, and the front and rear window channel I'm going in a little bit, but I'm not jabbing the disc in all the way. You can see the roof comes off, no big deal. We're going to go around to the quarters right now. As you can see, there's tons of filler just coming off on these quarter panels. We're going to cut same thing we did around the roof, around the perimeter edge. Now what I do in the back, you kind of see the slice there. I go right into the trunk gutters because the trunk gutters are part of the quarter panels. They're made together. So for me, it's easier to leave the tail panel section like it would be as you're installing it, go right above the spot welds, come into the trunk area. Then you could see I'll work my way around the whole bottom of the quarter panel towards the front. I'm not going to even mess with the door jamb area. I just cut right up there, following that rear window around, and then I go up last section around that trunk hinge deck filler bracket all the way to the top quarter bracket and finish it off in the window, and you see it pushes right off. We're going to show you another view of it. You can see the trunk area has already been cut. We're doing the bottom. This one's a little bit harder because it's a quarter panel sitting on top of another quarter panel. So right here in this door jamb area, it was having a hard time letting go. Some of the wheel areas weren't even welded together. So I was trying to cut two panels without going too deep in other parts of the car. But same process. I'm using an air hammer. There's a trunk quarter panel support bracket right there. So that's one thing I was trying not to harm coming out. And you could take a look. Here's that quarter panel where it's doubled up together once we got it off. Once you have the roof off and both quarter panels off, it really starts giving you an idea how bad your car is going to be and how much more work on the inner structure you have. This is like a make or break moment. As you can see with this car, it's got a lot of surface rust on it, but really there is no deep rust that's pitting through the metal. There is a little bit on the top A-pillar channel, but again, nothing crazy compared to some of the cars when we pull the roof and the inner structure off, and they just are horrible. Now that we're done with the quarter panels and exterior trim and everything else, you could see how the quarter panels, we just cut the tail panel loose. This just opens up the whole area. Now we'll work to the tail panel area. We're not saving anything back here. These cross rails have been damaged from an accident. They're rusted out. There's a bunch of damage in here and the tail panel. So what we're doing, we're just cutting around the frame rails. As of right now, the plan with this Nova is to save the frame rails. However, looking at now that we got this cross rail off, it really opened a lot more view of the frame rails, and they're questionable. So I decided at this point to contact the owner and see what he wanted to do with these frame rails. As I'm waiting for him to get back with me, we're going to go ahead and dissect this trunk area like we're keeping the frame rails. So I also like to keep, if the frame rails are there and we're salvaging them, that cross rail section. So you see, I'm cutting the center trunk right around that cross rail. And yes, I know a lot of new panels come with this cross rail, but leaving this cross rail in there, it's usually welded really good. I'll go in there and re-support it and touch it up from the factory if it's in good solid condition, and then it holds the whole back of the car together. So I'll pull the new cross rail off the new floor trunk pan, and then what we'll do, what we find most of the time, is there's not any primer in there anyway. So we'll go ahead and put some weld through primer in there and use the factory cross rail with the factory frame rails on a car like this we're going to keep. After we get the center section out, you can see we're just going to cut the trunk drop off area. This car, we're also taking the wheel houses out. We knew this from the start, so we're going to cut right up through the wheel houses and expose them. This is an area you can use a plasma cutter, save on cutoff wheels, but honestly, if I'm trying to save the frame rails, I could do a cleaner cut with a cutoff disc. Saying that, the owner got back to me. We are going to remove the frame rails. You could see there's a bunch of rust damage already before we even got the rail separated from the bottom floor, and it's damage hitting on this side. So the owner said, let's just redo them. If I was saving the frame rails, like I said, I would take an air chisel and just pop up the whole trunk floor down this whole frame rail. Since it's a stronger metal, usually it comes right up. What I'm doing instead right now, I'm building jig pieces. You can see we're going around the rear frame shackle mounts, and I'm going on the inside. I'm putting tabs on the frame rail so I can just kind of push the frame rail, my new one, in place, and the same thing around the top. Once that's jigged up, we'll come back to it, but we're going to remove those frame rails. I'm going to do a little cleanup first around the roof area and everything else. I like to get most of my roof completely done with the bottom wheel houses and everything holding the car. It kind of makes more sense than if you cut all the support out of the bottom of the car and the top's not as strong. Well, now you're pulling, prying, and hammering on this roof structure. It's easier at that point to make the roof structure bend or, something get damaged on this thing. Where right now, this whole roof structure, the window structure, the deck filler panel, the package tray area, everything's holding this car together so we can lay on this car. There's less of a chance we're going to bend it or warp it or do any damage. So you can see right here, I'm taking out the drip rails. We cannot buy drip rails. This car really does kind of need them. We got some rust in the front, but if anyone has a lead on where you can get factory drip rails for these 60 to 72 Novas, please send me a message because we looked everywhere, we couldn't find them. So in trying to save the drip rails, we're going to sit there and take a grinding disc, and what I'm doing, I'm grinding out the roof edge right there, just the roof edge. This is one of those things, we grind a little, we look a little. You don't want to go too far or you go through the drip rail. So I'm easily grinding that edge and weakening it. Then I'm coming in with a hammer and a screwdriver by hand, and I'm just popping up the spot rivets. You don't want to use an air chisel here. Nothing that's going to damage this drip rail. If a spot weld won't come up, go there and just lightly start grinding it some more. This is one of those things that just takes a little bit of time. If you rush this, you can do damage to the drip rails, and at this point, you're kind of stuck if they're not making them. I've never had a Nova where we had to replace them. This is actually the worst car on the drip rail area I've seen. And actually, the drip rails are only bad in the right front spot. It's mostly all the rust that we think is there underneath it. Now that most of the roof support is all cleaned up and we don't have to do any major work on the roof, we're going to go ahead and start removing some of the structure that's holding this roof together and the areas that we need to get the whole bottom of the car stripped. Realistically speaking, it looks like we're going to strip this car from the rear frame rails all the way to the cowl panel. And I'll show you in the future why you'll see the damage on it, but this is a piece, this rear seat divider tray, that's going to be saved on this car. So we drilled out the spot welds, and then we used the air chisel around it to just clean everything up and then safely remove it to have it be reinstalled after the project's about done. We're now removing this rear small deck filler area above the rear package tray. We're just cutting around the perimeter of this thing. I know most of this is going to replace, but I'm going to keep some of it for support. You can see there's some rat's nests that came out of it, so it's a good thing we removed that. And then what I'm going to do now, I drilled out all the spot welds for both of the trunk hinges, got them loose, and then we're just taking the air chisel and coming back through without damaging the trunk hinges themselves. We're not really concerned, obviously, about the wheel houses, but we'll go ahead and just pop them off and just relieve them. That will let us cut the rest of this package tray right now out of there. What I am going to do, see, I'm cutting the extension out, this deck filler extension with the drip rail in there and everything else. That piece is being replaced with the new package tray. But what we're going to end up doing, I'm going to leave the center supports of the package tray where it bends down and then where it connects in the back. Those have got a bunch of bends in it, and it's really going to hold the whole back of this car together. And I think we need that structure once we decide to pull the wheel houses and the frame rails and everything we're going to pull off on this car. That structure right there will be really good till the time that we go in and start assembling all this stuff and putting the structure back in. So if I was gonna cut these pieces out, I would have to add some bars in there. So for me, just leaving these two pieces in there just makes a little bit more sense. So now, like I said earlier, that I know we're not saving too many of these pieces, we're going to just go with the plasma cutter. Well, I just cut right around all the supports of the inner structure and down on the floor pan, and I just cut the wheel houses out. After that, we're just taking a hammer and we're just beating them right out. This will just relieve all that, and we'll come back through very carefully and we'll finish cleaning up the spot weld area. I did around beforehand cut the spot welds and use an air chisel on the top. So the only part I'm using the plasma on is from the floor area to the wheel houses, the inner wheel houses. Once I do that, and the front area, we could just hammer them right out, and you could see everything there's should be able to be saved up top while we're trying to keep, and now everything on the bottom is going to be removed. Since everything's going to be removed, we're going to start just using the plasma on most of this stuff. I am removing the frame rail in smaller sections. It's just going to be easier to remove from my jig pieces, and you'll see how it's kind of jigged. So the areas are going to just sit in the very back right there, and there'll be those tabs that where the top of the frame rail goes up, we could pull those down and then we'll pull them towards each other. That should hold them in, and then our shackle points are jigged in the back. But like I said, we're going to just remove this car, same thing on the floor pan, everything forward in smaller sections. It's going to be more manageable and easier to cut apart. You have to remember, these cars aren't really designed to be removed, so dissecting them is a little bit more of a challenge. When you do that in small manageable sections, it makes life a little bit easier, especially with one person trying to lift everything up. So right here, the idea was to get right in front of where those torque boxes are on the back frame rail area. I cut right across there, and we just removed that whole section. Now I cut the torque boxes right down with the plasma cutter against the inner rockers, and then now I took the cutoff wheel, and the reason I'm using a cutoff wheel now is just with all this insulation in here, it's just making a hard time and clogging up the plasma cutter. So with the cutoff wheel, you can see I just cut this whole section out, and then we're going to just same thing, hammer it. All this stuff is destroyed. We're not really worried about saving anything but the rocker panels, which are in pretty good shape. Once I went through the bottom of this car and cut all the joists out with the plasma cutter, I decided to use, again, the cutoff wheel on the top. We're going to try to remove this center floor section in one piece. You're going to see in a second, we're going to have to split down the middle just to get it loose because it's got all the braces going into the rocker panels. We are going to come back through, you'll see in a little bit, and get the braces later in the rockers. Right now, we're doing the same thing as the skin of the roof and the quarters. We're just rough cutting everything. We want the big metal removed first, get all the stuff that's in the way, all the rusted panels, everything out of the way, and then we'll come back through and clean up the edges and just fine tune once we know what we're keeping. As you can see, once I cut the center brace and everything out of this thing and it kind of folds in on itself, it makes life a lot easier. Now we are going to remove the firewall. There's just so much rust at the bottom of this thing. There's panels upon panels, so we are going to cut the firewall. Initially that wasn't completely in the plan, but things changed. I talked to the owner again, and we decided that the firewall, it's going to be better, the project will come out better if we remove this. So I'm rough cutting the firewall. I did jig up those two supports on the front firewall. We're going to leave those in place. You're going to see we're going to air chisel the firewall off there. To me, that's our straight reference point on the whole front of the car along with the rockers. It's going to make things so much easier. I pre-drilled all these spot welds going into the cowl panel. So once I pre-drill all the spot welds, you can see the air chisel just pops off the remaining little bit of it, and I'm just working around it so we don't damage the cowl panel. That's very crucial in this on a panel that I know 100% we want to keep. Once we get the front firewall out, we're going to turn our attention to the side cowl panels. This is a rusted area that happens a lot on these cars. All the GM cars, it seems like. The cowl panel drains through the center vents and then comes out the sides. There's a little hole in the bottom. So leaves and dirt, debris get in there. They clog up the hole. And then this is one of the first panels at the very bottom of the rust. This car's a perfect example of that. It's not horrible, but it's just a panel that we are going to replace. I cut it right around. And then what I decided to do on this side, you see I did that one with a cutoff wheel, but just to show you the difference, you could do this with an air chisel just as fast and just as efficient. You could just kind of, once it's sharp, run right down the edges and then work your way around, and you're kind of just guiding it. You see I'm guiding with my front hand and I'm using my back hand to just kind of steer the back and push it in. So just work with the air hammer, let it do all the work for you, and then you're just kind of guiding it in the process. Now that we got the main side cowl pieces off, like I said, we're going to come back with the air chisel and we're going to go finish dissecting the floor area off the rocker panels. The rocker panels look really good on the car. We're going to know 100% sure after sandblasting, but realistically what I'm doing, I'm not even bothered drilling out the spot welds except for the area that had the support braces. The air chisel won't pull out these big support braces because the spot welds are a lot stronger. It might remove some of them, but you're going to do more damage. So at that point, we're going to take the belt sander and just belt sand the top layer of the spot welds down and then come back with the air chisel. But on this smaller floor pan 18 gauge section, you could see the air chisel just working around those spot welds. Like I said earlier, it rips them right out. On the other side, you could see this is the area that the Firewall just kind of sealed the deal on the decision. We got this floor sheet metal air duct brace that someone screwed in place on top of rusted panels, on top of some more filler work. There's just a bunch of layers in this corner, and then going up this whole firewall, it just gets worse and worse. So same thing we did on the other side. We're going to take the air chisel and we're working our way from the back forward. I already got the braces out on this side, and we're working our way back forward, and then this whole area, since we're keeping that front support brace that the subframe bolts into and everything, we're going to go ahead and just air chisel the floor pan off of it. It's the same process as doing the rocker. This is some thicker metal, so we're able to do this. Because this is such thick metal, it did get a little bit of pitting, but in general, this is a very salvageable piece. So we're going to sandblast it when the next video and the time comes, make sure everything's good with it. But if that's the case, these pieces are going to stay, and we're going to just remove them off the new firewall. You can see we're cutting down the inner cowl vent area. So that's going to separate that area. And then this floor pan, you're going to have to be a little creative because it does technically sandwich in between that brace on the outside and then the outer cowl area. I also talked to the owner about these outer side cowl pieces. He already has them, so again, not an issue. We're going to go ahead and remove them. I'm still not removing the whole cowl section. I think it should be easier just to graft in this front section and the outside piece if this all works on sandblasting, because these pieces hold the cowl panel very well. But saying that, we'll see how the car comes back from blasting. We are going to remove this. I think at this point, the Nova is pretty much cut down for the most part on how it's going to be. We'll go ahead and wrap up this video for some final thoughts.
All right, we're going to wrap up the cut down process on this 1970 Nova. As you could see, it's pretty bad. I mean, we took the firewall off, like I said, walking around this car. This is why we cut them apart. I mean, yeah, the roof didn't look that bad. It had some signs around the front and rear window channels, and a lot of people would just go ahead and just patch that area and call it a day. But what you can't get is all this surface rust behind these areas. You could see in a lot of spots, including the firewall up here, that these things weren't prepared from the factory. It was just bare metal. A lot of stuff up here in this inner structure, the roof structure, it's the same way. It's bare metal. So of course, with the humidity and everything underneath is completely rusted. It's not all the way through. This car, actually the GM seemed to do a little bit better. I see a lot of surface rust on them, but they don't have that deep pitted rust, at least up here, like some of the other brands of cars we work on. But you see why we did it the way we did. We did our rear frame rail mounts. So like you saw how we built these mounts, the shackles are going to come in here, they're going to tie guy up here, everything's really strong. So that should get our frame rails exactly where we want to go. I did leave the support walking around this car back here up top. Now I cut out the center of this rear package tray. The owner wanted to replace it. He said the speakers were busted, so we went and cut that out, planning on putting a new one in there, but it's just holding the back of this car together. Also, I left these door jams on. These would be part of the quarter panel. Same thing. If I take this door jam out, this is a very strong piece holding this car together. There's only a half piece of metal and then this inner structure that's gonna hold this section together. So if I take it apart, the car's gonna get a lot weaker. Like you said, I can't even push this car. So as we're taking it a blast, as we're moving it, we're gonna leave these on till just about when we go put the new quarter panels on. We can get the new wheel houses in here and get everything with the floor complete and then cut these off. Same thing with that rear package tray. On the front end here, like I said, we were good, we kept the dashboard. I did end up cutting the front of these out. They were just rusted out and I found out the owner already had a set of them. So what we're gonna end up doing with them, you'll see in the future, we're gonna leave this section because the cowl panel, again, is really strong. I don't wanna really disturb it. So we're gonna just kind of splice one in, weld one in right there, and then put the outer skin on that. On the Firewall does come with all these brackets and everything. We're gonna go ahead and take those off the new Firewall. These aren't in horrible shape, and then the Firewall will be jigged up and sit right there. That's why we jigged off here and the rockers in the first video, so I have that option. So, you see, we're gonna get this car ready to blast. Hopefully you enjoyed this cut down video on the 70 Nova. If you like videos like this, please stay tuned to our channel. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars, and we'll see you next time.